Before we begin, the title is written in the right-hand corner of the screen. Enjoy watching. The story begins at an uncle's house where a niece named Sophia lives. From the morning, his wife, as usual, dissatisfied with something, she started screaming loudly and looking for the girls. On the way, she met one of the helpers and learned that Sophia was still mopping the floor by the stairs. The woman got even more pissed off and went straight to her. As usual, she wanted to give her a few more assignments just so her niece wouldn't have a moment's rest. The lady is very tired, but to please her aunt, she does not stop and continues to scrub the floor through her strength. Her life in this house is a living hell. Sophia is no longer different from the staff, and sometimes she is forced to do even more. When all of a sudden, she just looked up, and the second someone poured a bucket of cold water on her. Unsurprisingly, that person turned out to be Auntie. Sophia asked what she had done wrong, to which the woman replied that she'd been doing the same thing for too long, even though she should have done it in the morning. The niece started apologizing and explained that she passed out while cleaning, so she couldn't do it any faster. Victoria said she didn't need her excuses and ordered her to handle it within the hour. She doesn't understand how her niece dares to act like this. After all, she let her stay here when Sophia came home in tears after the wedding. In her opinion, as a thank you, she is obliged to do whatever is asked of her and has no right to complain about anything. The girl is in a desperate situation because she really can't refuse help after her relatives allowed her to stay in the house. At one point, she suddenly sees her half-sister, who unlike her doesn't look so tired. Angelina couldn't get past it and asked why her sister looked like that. She saw the drenched clothes, the unkempt hair, and dirty face. But instead of helping her, the girl continued to examine her from every angle, and afterward said it was exactly what Sophia deserved after she dishonored their last name. She asked her to stay away and go back to her work, and then, without even saying goodbye, the girl went about her business. She treated her worse than the attendant. Meanwhile, the next day came. Despite the beautiful weather and bright sunshine, being in this house, Sophia has not been happy about anything for a long time now. Even the maids think that Madame Victoria makes her niece do work that she would not make even one of them do. They are well aware that it is impossible for one person to clean all the floors in the house, and they do not hide the fact that they resent the mistress's attitude towards Sophia. And as soon as they started talking about Sophia's divorce, it was like she came out of nowhere and heard those words. Maids became very embarrassed, and they apologized at once and explained that they had meant no wrong. Sophia replied that she was fine and said she just wanted a drink of water. They suggested she draw water from the well because it was the purest and tastiest. When the girl was 15, she was the sole survivor of a fire that killed her parents. After that, she was adopted by her uncle, but he hated her from the beginning. He constantly demanded something in return and ordered me to do chores around the house. Sophia thought she was lucky, but as time went on, she realized she was trapped in a trap. She was forced to agree to live in this man's house, although if she had a choice, she would never have done so. The first day she set foot in his house, the man warned her that as soon as she turned 16, he would throw her out and marry her off. But unfortunately, her first marriage didn't work out. She had to go back, and at this point, she's 25 years old. No one wants a woman of her age, and unfortunately the girl has no connections that would help her move out of here. The only thing left is to be grateful for what her uncle has done for her. No one ever pays attention to whether it's even realistic to do what they're asking her to do. Because of fear, the girl never complained about anything, not even her injured hands, which haven't healed in years. She has plenty of scars from burns, various scrapes and blisters, but if she dares to tell any of them, she'll get twice as much work. It's always been this way. Sophia is used to this life, and despite this, she continues to dream of living on her own. Her relatives never thought about whether they were doing the right thing or not. The only thing that mattered to them was to make a profit. Meanwhile, walking through the woods, Sophia spots a dog. She noticed her right away and wanted to get closer. It was immediately obvious to her that this was a very kind and friendly dog. The girl wasn't afraid and decided to pet him. She hadn't been happy in a long time, and she'd forgotten the last time she'd smiled genuinely. Turns out, and I took him for my daughter because Sophia loves animals. She hadn't seen him in a very long time, but surprisingly, she remembered and recognized him at first sight. The dog, the only one left of her family, Meanwhile, Angelina came to her father for an important conversation and learned that he was going to marry her off to a beast. The man isn't even hiding it, he said. It's his final decision that's not even up for discussion. He really wants to marry her off to someone from a certain family, and then do everything in his power to make it happen. At that moment, her mother joined them. She asked her daughter not to worry, because that family had the Earl rank, and for them it was the most important thing. They intend to capitalize through their daughter's wedding. The fact is that the medicine that family owns can bring huge profits to the family trading company. In response, Angelina refused to marry and warned that they could never change her mind or force her to do so. The girl had envisioned her marriage a little differently and never thought about her parents insisting on marrying a beast. As she suddenly had what she thought was a brilliant idea, she looked at her father and hinted that the benefit can be obtained by a slightly different method. Is Angelina hinting about Sophia? The man did not think long, and immediately afterward, invited his niece into his office. Without greetings, he informed her that she was to be the bride of the beast instead of Angelina. The family, thanks to which they want to benefit, is a family of white wolves, which everyone is afraid of. They say that they destroy everyone who does not like them, and the head of the family is a man-wolf, who is considered a real villain. The girl immediately realized that her half-sister was probably afraid to marry this man, so she should do it instead of her. Sophia was very frightened, for she had heard of this family and would not want to risk her life for her uncle's company. At this point, the man began to remind her that the girl should be grateful for his help and hinted that she had no right to refuse, for otherwise she risked the street. He did not even listen to her answer and immediately warned her to never tell her future husband about her previous failed marriage after the conversation. She was sent to some place, and most likely the girl will get acquainted with the family. She wasn't explained or told what to prepare for. She was so afraid of upsetting and angering her uncle that she didn't say a single word to him. She had to accept it and not even think about starting to fight back. The only thing she wanted to do was take her dog with her, but unfortunately time was too short. At least that's what her aunt told her. The woman wouldn't even listen to anything about it. Her excuse was that it could be dangerous to take the dog with her. So, she promised to take care of him, and as soon as the girl got married, they would give her the dog. Even in this situation, Sophia was not given any choice. She couldn't insist on anything, much less set any conditions. After a while, she began to miss him very much, and was upset that because of her relatives, she did not have the opportunity to decide for herself, even who to marry. The girl decided that now was not the time to cry, because she needed to prepare to meet her future husband and fulfill her mission. She thought that even if she had to marry the beast, maybe her life would be even better. So she decided she wouldn't get upset ahead of time. There's no telling what's really in store for her. Meanwhile, as soon as she reached the palace, the assistant at once informed his master of the... He said that Miss Sophia had already arrived, so she should be met in the room prepared for the conversation. Very curious how they will react to each other and how this meeting will play out. A spacious piece of land in the middle of the forest, on which a beautiful mansion stands quietly, is the estate of the beast Jade. The girl didn't think this place would be so huge. This estate is really impressive. His family served the empire for many years as pharmacists and drug makers. Currently, the head of the family is the 9th Lord Jade. Sophia is very curious to find out if he really is as scary a man as people say he is. Meanwhile, she was allowed to go into the drawing room and was asked to wait a little while for a... The girl is very nervous, for she is afraid of seeing a cruel and frightening beast. She tried to pretend as if she wasn't nervous at all, though in truth, she was beginning to have thoughts of going back in and not risk her life by marrying a real beast. And besides, no one guarantees her that everything will be okay and she has nothing to fear. Her relatives didn't even try to comfort her. They just made her do it and gave her no choice. A little earlier, when she was just getting ready to go on the road, her sister wanted to talk to her and she came to her room and started asking a lot of questions, like she wasn't the one who suggested the idea to my dad. Although the girl was well aware that Angelina was originally supposed to marry the beast. Instead of supporting and comforting the girl, her sister started talking about how cruel those animals were. Recently, they destroyed someone in the middle of the day for no reason. They say that person was just walking by and didn't even look in their direction. She likes to watch her sister Sophia start to fear her future husband when she calms down, because she's already done enough to ruin her life. Lastly, Angelina said she would hope her sister lived a happy life with her new husband. Though her smile at that moment was too fake, it looked like an ominous anticipation of something bad. Meanwhile, she was finally informed that the Lord would be released soon. He'll be waiting for her in a special room that his assistant will help her get to. After a while, she saw him, and was very much surprised that he met her in the body of a man. It turns out he has very beautiful silver hair, golden eyes, and unusual looks. She's never seen a guy like that before. They met and began to scrutinize each other, for each of them was curious to know and see as much as possible. In fact, Sophia had pictured him quite differently. She had expected to see an aggressive beast that would be scary to talk to. The girl greeted him and said she was very pleased to meet him. Afterward, she introduced herself and said she'd try not to disappoint him. Jade heard this and was very surprised, really wondering what he was thinking right now, and if he liked Sophia. The first few minutes he simply remains silent and scrutinizes her appearance, and then he decided to confess something. All this time he was sure no girl would dare to be his wife. It turns out he's also not exactly thrilled about having to marry a girl he's seeing for the first time in his life, with no feelings and no real love. Sophia hadn't expected to hear him say those words and wondered if perhaps she was worrying for nothing and dreading this meeting so much. This man was much kinder, and it seems like the meeting will be a calm and safe atmosphere. When suddenly the guy started to turn into a real beast, he decided to ask a question. He really wonders if the girl has ever seen a real beast, and realizes what she's agreeing to. Sophia doesn't even know how to react to this. Though judging by her reaction, it should all be understandable. The wolf suggested that the girl would probably regret coming here as soon as she saw him like this. He's become a beast that makes you want to run and cry in fear. I don't think he's scaring his future wife on purpose, because otherwise it's hard to explain why he's doing it. She's already afraid to say the wrong thing, and it's like he's making her change her mind and refuse to marry him. In response, Sophia said she'd try to get used to it. After all, it wasn't the appearance that mattered, it was the safety he had to promise about. He didn't like those words. The wolf is sure she's purposely pretending like she's not afraid of him and really wants to be his wife. So, the wolf warned that if she doesn't want to risk it, she better leave right now. A very serious and responsible choice has appeared before her. The girl doesn't know how to act, because maybe it's just a test. Not ruling out the possibility that the wolf was just pretending and wanted to see her reaction, Sophia decided not to give up, and said that she really intended to be his wife. She would not go back, for she must fulfill her uncle's request. The beast at once calmed down and stopped growling. He had heard what he wanted and was ready to give his opinion. He's actually okay with marrying her, but before he does, she has to try to get everyone to recognize her as his fiancée. If she could stay here and last at least a few days. The wolf didn't even doubt it. No one had ever stayed here that long before. Sophia still didn't understand why she needed to force something on someone, but since she did, she'd have to do it. She has no idea what's in store for her next, though it's likely that even living together with a wolf would be much more pleasant than going back to her relatives. Either way, she has no other choice. She either goes home and continues to suffer or stays here and tries to survive. It's not the most pleasant choice, but there's no other option. Meanwhile, when the local maids saw her, they immediately started gossiping and spreading rumors. They've never seen a normal person who can't turn into a beast. At this point, the girl does not even expect a happy life together, because she realizes that the Lord hates people. Like the rest of the staff here, obviously she's gonna have a hard time, but even that's better than going back. For starters, she was helped and sent suitable clothing, had her hair done, and was informed of her duties. Sophia would do anything to be respected and not be told she owed something. She has never been welcomed anywhere, but still, the girl does not intend to give up and continues to believe in a happy future. In the meantime, she went outside and decided to familiarize herself with the estate. She was immediately seen by the maids, and they were surprised that someone had put this uniform on her, because only the staff wore such clothes. The girl replied that she didn't mind helping. Besides, she wasn't used to resting. She did this kind of work every day, and worked without a day off. She had to do the impossible and accomplish in half a day what would normally take several days to accomplish. After that, she started talking about her past, and before she knew it, a lot of time had passed. At that moment, Jade noticed her. He was very surprised that his wife was socializing with the maids. After all, he didn't make her work, much less wear clothes like that. The guy started watching her from afar and studying her character, demeanor, and what kind of person she was. For a moment, he remembered a very faint odor he had smelled during the acquaintance of the... and he seems to know the scent from somewhere, and he's sure he couldn't mistake it for anything else. He became very curious about what her specialty was and why, unlike other people, he didn't get aggressive or want to do something bad to her. He's getting his behavior under control, though he's never had that before. Meanwhile, the next day came, and like the rest of the staff, the girl woke up first thing in the morning, for she was not accustomed to sleep long. It's hard for her to get used to the fact that no one's making her do anything now. The only thing she has to do is be Jade's wife and do what she likes. But since it's so hard for her to let herself rest or inactivity, she's always wanting to help someone. Meanwhile, it's been 10 days since she arrived and became the Lord's bride. But something has remained the same. She continues to approach the staff and offer her help. In reply, the beasts are surprised and begin to ignore her, for they do not know what to say to it. And whether or not they have the right to accept such an offer from her, they are sure that Sophia is only pretending to help and looking down on them. The girl thinks you can't blame them for having that opinion, because she would probably feel the same way if she were in their shoes. The girl didn't expect to be treated well here, but still, she'd have to do her best to keep the engagement on track. Back in the days when she lived at her uncle's house, when she was very sick and hurting, she always had a dog with her. She was starting to miss him a lot, because right now, he'd be a big help to her. Even just being around him, she begins to lack the support of someone to share her problems with. At that moment, Sophia heard someone's voice. She immediately turned around and saw one of the maids before her, whose clean white garment had fallen to the ground. The girl immediately ran up to her and offered her help, for if anyone saw it, she might be in trouble. Sophia didn't listen to this girl and decided that no matter what, she had to help her out. She saw that the girl had something wrong with her arm. It really hurt her to lift her clothes. Accordingly, Sophia didn't stand aside. After that, the girl asked if everything was okay because obviously she had something wrong. The maid doesn't even know what to say to that, because she was helped by the gentleman's fiancé, who shouldn't have done it. The girl began to apologize and said it wasn't necessary, as she could have packed those clothes herself. Sophia replied that there was nothing wrong with it anyway. She was happy to help and thought it was fine. The maid isn't used to having someone help her, so she expects and sees it as a trick. It's the first time she's ever had someone do a job for her. The girl hung up all the clothes and after that, asked what more needed to be done. She really wants to help so the maid doesn't have to do it through pain because of her hand. She felt incredibly good. The girl still couldn't believe it wasn't a dream. She is very much afraid that the Lord will find out about it and decide to punish her. Though really, in any case, the bride will explain everything to him anyway. Afterwards, she wet one of the towels and suggested that you put it on your arm, so the pain would be much easier to feel. Sophia asked that if she needed any more help, she would be happy to do so, because he understands how important it is to help people in need, especially in situations like this. She's seen it more than once and been in her shoes. In those moments, she wanted to cry from loneliness and lack of support. Afterward, the maid thanked her again for her help and said that she had not thought it possible to. That's how they met. Sophia has this one person she's on good terms with, when suddenly, they didn't even notice that at that moment, a lord approached them. He appeared very stealthily. The girl was even more frightened than the maid. She went straight to him and was afraid to even say anything. After that, he turned to her and said there was something urgent to talk about. The guy didn't say what, but hinted that it was very important. He asked to follow him and started walking towards his office. He has a very serious expression on his face, which means that the Lord is not happy about something. Meanwhile, they've arrived at his office and it seems the fun part is starting. He's made her very nervous, and afterwards, asked what she was trying to win the favor of the maids by helping them and doing other people's work for. He expected her to behave differently and was sure that the girl would be afraid to leave even her room. But she's always doing something, and she doesn't stand still. She talks to everyone and tries to create good relationships with people. Instead of answering his question, the girl asked if he really hated people. Without thinking long, he replied and said it was true, He never hid it, and he would never change his mind. Sophia hadn't expected such a reaction, and noticed that when he got nervous, he immediately turned into a wolf. She wondered if he was in control of himself at times like this, and as soon as she thought about it, Jade decided to explain. They beasts have been discriminated against by humans for a very long time now. Therefore, he did not and cannot have a good attitude towards them, especially if they do not hide their bad attitude. At that moment, she remembered some who had recently refused her help and thought she looked down on them. The girl immediately realized what was wrong and decided that it needed to be fixed, because many people make mistakes and misunderstand her. For instance, when that maid refused to help, it was only because the girl suspected the mistress of checking and did not believe in the sincerity of her help. She told her husband that in time, she would try to prove that it wasn't true, and they were all very wrong. Jade didn't answer a single word. He started to go silent, which meant the girl had succeeded in getting him interested. It's really very hard for him to believe that one of the people they used to think of as their enemies is trying to convince that she has no bad intentions. Afterward, he remembered that he had not so spoken. The Lord recalled that earlier, she had wanted to be his wife, so explained that becoming a beast's wife meant more than just existing on the estate. She would have to live among the beasts and accompany her husband to social events. And the most important thing she has to accept is that, unlike humans, animals have periods of intense and uncontrollable aggression, which means that if a girl sees her husband being overly aggressive, she has only two options: hide or try to calm him down. Since the second option doesn't offer any guarantee of safety, the guy's hinting that he'd rather not be pissed off. When he's out of control, he won't care who's in front of him. If a girl wants to become his wife, she must make sure that even in such moments, he will never allow himself to be bad towards her. But it's going to take some effort. It could take years or even decades, depending on her desire and fear of going back to a home where her life will be and has been many times worse. Sophia vividly remembered those moments when she felt superfluous and wished she could escape. As suddenly, remembering all these moments, the girl began to cough violently, as if short of breath. She started choking and she doesn't know what's going on, she's panicking. But as soon as Jade was startled and asked what was happening to her, the girl stopped coughing the second she did, and said everything's fine, when really, she doesn't know what's going on. At one point, out of habit from the past, she thought the guy would react badly and punish her. She asked him not to hit her, which seemed very strange because he hadn't really thought about it. After that, he felt so sorry for her that he came even closer and tried to hug her. She felt incredibly pleased, but at the same time, very unaccustomed. She had forgotten the last time someone had felt sorry for her and tried to support her. Jade asked her to calm down, take a deep and small breath. He said it should help. The degree of surprise of the girl at this moment simply cannot be conveyed in words. It was as if she was transported to childhood, where instead of him was her mother. Sophia couldn't help herself and started crying. At the same time, she felt very embarrassed, because when she did this at her uncle's house, she was very much punished and forbidden to show weakness. The girl never thought animals could be so good. He treated her much better than the people she lived with. A much kinder guy, and with him around, she felt protected for the first time. Sophia doesn't even know how to comment on it. She started to keep quiet and enjoy this moment, when suddenly, she thanked him for his support, and in that moment, the guy seemed to change. He stopped hugging her, like he got emotional and did something that was embarrassing. He stepped back some distance, looked at her with surprised eyes, and pretended as if nothing had happened. It turns out he attributed his behavior to the fact that he might have frightened her with the hug. Though in fact, the girl was very pleased. She didn't mind at all, and wasn't frightened at all. Jade started to leave to go about his business, and didn't even say goodbye. He was starting to act too weird. If he was so embarrassed about his breeding, he's probably not used to behaving this way because he usually has the image of a dangerous beast. Most likely he just didn't want to spoil his reputation, even though it's improved. First marriage and girl, the decision was made right after her uncle took her into his home, and her ex-husband was the only son of a kimono salesman. He was a cheerful worker, and such a wonderful husband that everyone around her envied him. But at home he was a completely different person. No one believed it when the girl told how unbearable it was to live with him. The worst husband. Impossible to exist with in peace. It was him. He had none of the good qualities when he was at home. And each time, after conflicts and his terrible behavior, He tried to apologize. Each time, it was harder and harder to forgive him. She kept thinking about leaving him and not putting up with this unbearable life together. Even now that she lives here and is about to become the bride of the beast, she is much calmer and more comfortable with even the beast recently hugged her and tried to support her. It's impossible to believe, but that's the reality. Meanwhile, the girl remembers the very moment she felt like she'd never felt before. She felt for the first time close to a real man who would never ignore her tears and was always ready to help her. Each time she starts to think that maybe he's not as bad as she thought he was. Even in the form of a beast, he is not so dangerous as her first husband. Is it not, after such an experience, that she is no longer afraid of anything, and the next will be better than the last? As usual, the girl started helping the maids, and as soon as she did something, they immediately started discussing it, saying that no matter how hard she tried, they could never trust her anyway. No matter how good she is, she'll never be able to get back and fix the reputations of the people who ruined her forever. They're sure that it's just not possible to waste their time and energy that could be spent on something more enjoyable. Of course, Sophia can hear all this talking, but at the same time, she doesn't even think about stopping. She's constantly being watched by one of the maids she helped recently. The girl looks at her a lot and tries to stay as close as possible. In the meantime, Sophia had come up with a clear plan and decided that no matter what anyone said about her, she would do whatever it took to get people to trust her. Instead of waking up at a convenient time, the girl goes out very early and starts doing work instead of the staff. She purposely does it early so they have less to do. They are of course very pleased, but even so, their opinion doesn't change. They're grateful for her help, but they continue to question her good intentions. To them, her endeavors look like a trap or something to be tested, though it is not at all so. Are they really not planning on giving her even one chance, since she's done nothing wrong in all this time? On the contrary, instead of enjoying a fancy life and thinking about herself, she does half their work and doesn't even get a word of thanks. As soon as Sophia is alone, she wants to cry a lot, because no one notices her efforts. She tries to be good, but no one appreciates it. Even Jade tried to support her, and the staff keeps looking for a catch and not believing her. At some point, she just doesn't have any energy and motivation left to keep trying and befriend each of them. The girl just doesn't see results. Meanwhile, walking down the corridor, the Lord meets one of his assistants. He remembered her immediately and asked her to listen to him for a few minutes. The guy looked at her like he was going to punish her for something. The maid is frightened, for she knows that if the master is angry, it can turn into something terrible. It turns out the girl is very much mistaken. In fact, that's not what Jade wanted to talk about at all. He was just looking for his fiancée and wanted to ask if she had seen her or not. To which the girl replied that she did not even know how to answer the question, for lately she had noticed something strange in her behavior. The guy asked if she got bored so quickly and left because he thought there was no other reason. The maid said that because of too much work she was doing in their place, Sophia fainted with a high fever. When she went into her room to ask something, no one answered. The maid peeped in and saw that the mistress was unconscious. She is now resting in her room in the annex. She's much better now. But still, something needs to be done about it. Jade was once again convinced that humans are very weak compared to beasts. They can't stand the lightest of loads that beasts don't even count as loads. Once upon a time, when the wolf had to live among humans, he was constantly insulted and tried to ruin his life. They considered themselves stronger and more influential, and also always looking down upon the beasts just because they're majority of the... He always thought there was nothing good about dealing with people. But once a girl came into his life, she was the only person he felt comfortable with. She's really special. Sophia wasn't afraid to come here to the estate to be his wife. She is not afraid to show her weakness, and is constantly trying to create good relationships with everyone. Jade is very confused. He no longer knows if he should trust this man at all, or if it is better to trust his heart. When he starts to think about it, it gets even more complicated. There's a lot of doubt and at the same time, a desire to get to know her better. But so far, he hasn't found a single flaw in her. A girl trying to be comfortable for everyone, risking her health, as she is used to living without rest in her uncle's house. Here it is very difficult for her to stop thinking about work, but no one knows that yet. If the beasts only knew why she was acting this way, they would never question her. The girl is used to the fact that if she doesn't help or refuses to do something and can be punished, so She joined the maids at once and was afraid to do nothing, and all because of a terrible habit of pleasing those whom she dreaded after a hard day's work. She very often recalls her half-sister, who liked very much to see her suffering face. It made her feel better and made her happy. Amazingly, Sophia had the patience to stay in that house and not complain about anything. She turned a blind eye to her horrible behavior, lack of rest and constant health problems. When her sister refused something or wanted to choose something better, all the worst and hardest work went to Sophia. She only had to do it because they let her live with them. These people treated her worse than anyone else. She missed her parents very much and didn't know how long she would have to endure this torment. Meanwhile, the next day came. For the first time in her life, she was able to sleep and rest longer than usual. Opening her eyes, she saw Jade in front of her. He touched her face to check her temperature but accidentally woke her up. I can't believe it. But he actually came to see her first thing in the morning because he was worried about her being all right. The guy wants to talk to her. She realizes it's not the best time to do it. She needs to rest. In his presence, Sophia couldn't relax, and for some reason began to feel guilty. The girl immediately got up from the bed and started apologizing. The guy asked her to calm down and told her that getting up wasn't necessary. All he needs to do is check the temperature and make sure it's not too high. But unfortunately, the temperature is rising like this. Sophia gets very hot and can't stand being in a room with no air. She tries to be patient and not give any sign that anything is wrong. Meanwhile, the guy brought some kind of box into the room that's supposed to help lower the temperature. She has a lot of remedies that can deal with any symptom, which is exactly what her uncle wants to get his hands on. They are famous all over the world, but the only disadvantage is that they are too expensive, and also, you can't buy them in a regular store. But since it was a situation like this, Jade opened that box and picked out what he thought was the most appropriate medication. Sophia did not hesitate, because she knows it is absolutely safe. The guy knows very well what he is doing and understands the composition of each remedy. He asked her to take just one pill and promised that in a few minutes, she would forget about the fever and discomfort. In that moment, she felt like a special person, because this is an incredibly valuable drug that is only made here. The animals don't tell anyone the recipe. They pass it on to their children and have done so for thousands of years. At this point, the girl thanked him for his help and apologized for causing him trouble and taking up his precious time. He didn't say anything and just kept watching her. After a few minutes, the girl fell asleep. She is much better. Her fever has gone down considerably, and in general her condition is no longer as unbearable as it was before. The medicine worked in a matter of seconds. The Lord didn't even doubt it. He knew what he was doing and was confident in the effectiveness of the medicine. Afterward, he would not go away and stayed with her in the room, the lad feeling that he ought to be near her. At one point, he'd seen her thin wrists quite by accident and realized that she'd probably been able to be restricted in her diet in the past. When he hugged her earlier, immediately noticed the suspicious thinness so far. That's the only thing that's bothering him. Then, Jade decided to leave her alone, at which time, it would be much more proper to do something else, such as her further enjoyment of the... It is possible that her poor health and loss of consciousness are due to her poor nutrition, or rather, lack of it for a long time. At one point, Sophia unknowingly started crying and didn't notice her asking him to stay behind. The Lord was very surprised, so he couldn't ignore her words. Of course he stayed. He walked over to her and decided to stay close to her. The first day he saw her and found out what kind of family she was from, he was sure this lady would be spoiled and wouldn't appreciate anything. He had suspicions this girl had just had a fight with her parents, so she decided to get revenge, scare them into marrying him. He thought anything but that she was forced to do it. The guy doesn't understand what kind of father or relative would force a girl to do it for his own gain. The lad remembered his conversation with one of the maids. She told him that their workload was lessened by the fact that the lady did the cleaning and laundry without rest every day. But even though she tries, everyone keeps ignoring it and not noticing it. At that moment, he remembered his thoughts during the first meeting. He also wanted to kick her out and tried to ignore her. But the girl withstood it all. She's just used to this attitude and sees it as something normal. There was nothing unusual in it for her. She was treated 10 times worse than any beast of the... For the first time, he felt ashamed of his behavior and wanted to apologize to the man. He He began to blame himself for treating her horribly for no reason, for the girl had come with good intentions and all this time, not even resting. Jade doesn't understand how she can still be such a wonderful person after all the ways she's been treated. At some point, he wanted to change her life beyond recognition and make Sophia happy, because she deserves it. It's impossible to believe, but she's really used to change even for starting to cry after being mistreated. Meanwhile, the next day came. The weather outside was still the same, beautiful, and the bird song made the morning even more pleasant. Sophia woke up, opened her eyes, and for the first time felt how well rested her body felt. It had been a very long time since she had felt this way. Never thought such a thing possible. She remembered her yesterday morning and noticed the incredible difference. It was probably thanks to the medicine Lord Jade had given her. She felt it was the best sleep she'd had in a while. She didn't have a nightmare or something terrible for the first time. Her back and headache stopped. There is no fatigue and no desire to go back to bed, no matter how it looks from the outside. But she is genuinely happy to get a good night's sleep and not feel tired. As usual, the first thing Sophia did was to get to work. She started tidying up her room. As suddenly, she felt someone's presence. She became very uncomfortable and curious to see who was behind the door. And of course, no one doubted that there was a lord behind the door. He was just waiting and didn't want to enter the room so as not to disturb or interfere with the rest of the room. She wondered very much how long he'd been standing there. She had a renewed sense of guilt that wasn't going anywhere. She began to think how to explain her behavior, for he was against her resting and forgetting about work. The guy looked at her with that look to remind her of his request. Apparently for that very purpose, he started following her. The girl can't do without work, and even after everything that has happened to her, it is very difficult for her to allow herself to rest and do nothing. She started doing things that no one asked her to do. The Lord began to expect an explanation from her. But in response, the girl was afraid to say anything. She became very embarrassed. She hasn't kept her promise and is at risk of being constantly monitored by him. At this point, she started apologizing as usual. The girl was afraid to look him in the eye and promised that it would never happen again. To which the guy replied that he should apologize because he didn't supervise her and didn't forbid her to work. He said she didn't need to apologize for that at all. He was unhappy that the girl was ignoring his request. So as not to waste time on this conversation, he asked the most important thing, how she was feeling. Sophia didn't answer right away, for she was surprised he didn't chastise her or even yell, the Lord more concerned about her well-being than anything else. She said it gave her a good night's sleep and she didn't even notice her symptoms disappearing. The girl had never thought that such marvelous medicines existed in this world. It seemed to her that there was not a single disease they could not cope with. She thanked him and said that if it wasn't for his help, she definitely wouldn't have made it. Jade said that she didn't have to thank him for that, since he hadn't done anything special. He hinted that the girl had started apologizing too often, and he was starting to dislike it and even get a little aggressive. After that, the guy changed the subject and said it looked like she was going to help some of the maids again. So asked her not to do it. He said it was an order and next time his reaction wouldn't be so calm. He's not used to being ignored and trying to do the opposite, so his words are worth listening to. Afterwards, the Lord hinted that he had a very important conversation, which could no longer be postponed, and kept silent. Sophia lowered her gaze and thought it was something bad. She began to remember her actions that he might not like. She's sure the conversation won't be very pleasant, because for that, he even offered to go outside so no one could hear them. She started walking behind him and imagining different options of what he wanted to talk to her about. Something terrible appears in her thoughts, as if there is nothing good he can say to her. She doubts herself too much, and is afraid of those around her, when suddenly, without explaining anything, the Lord turned into a wolf. He looked at her with a look as if he had led her into a trap. The emotions that the girl felt at this moment, just impossible to convey in words. She is very frightened, but realizes that to run away from him will definitely not be possible. Afterward, he requested that the lady should not avert her gaze and look only at him, and after that, asked a question, how scared she is of a beast like him. Except that being alone in the woods with him, there's no easy answer. If he'd asked that question in that room, she wouldn't have been so nervous and would have been able to answer. And yet Sophia replied that she wasn't afraid of animals. I felt quite comfortable. She tried to look as calm as possible, and not give the appearance of wanting to turn back the clock and not agree to go with him to this place. At this point, he knew perfectly well it wasn't true, so he asked to answer the question again. The girl replied that of course she had been very afraid of him at first, but then when he began to take care of her, in spite of his hatred of people, her opinion changed. If she didn't know he was actually a real wolf, she never would have thought or believed it could happen. He was very gentle, caring, and calm. Even ordinary people rarely cared for her the way he did. So she's sure she has nothing to fear, much less feel in danger around him. The wolf hadn't expected such an answer, and this time, for some reason, he was even angrier. As suddenly, the wolf got very nervous and said that he would never trust people. They never say what they really think. In that case, Sophia has no idea how to change his mind. Though it's possible he's just trying to intimidate her on purpose, and really just wants to see her reaction. It could be a routine check or something like that. After that, he kept talking, and the girl became even more afraid of him. She was afraid to look him in the eye, for she didn't know what to expect from this wolf. At this point, he started with the most important thing they had come to this place for. He asked to explain why her scent seemed very familiar to him. The wolf doesn't remember them knowing each other or ever seeing each other, but for some reason, he can't stop thinking about it to this day. Every time he gets very close to her, smells an odor that doesn't give him peace of mind. And that's not all. Next to her, he feels a particular energy that feels very nice and special to him. I wonder if the girl knows what she's talking about because they've never really met before. It's possible that he's only treating her so well because her energy and scent seem so familiar. After that, Jade asked one last question and asked him to answer it as honestly as possible, namely, whether he could trust her and whether she had bad intentions. Instead of answering that question immediately, as usual, she started thinking about something and looking at him with surprised eyes. It turns out the girl is remembering her past, in which neither she nor she ever trusted the mob. Her uncle took advantage of her situation for his own benefit and never hid it, so trust was out of the question. After living like this, it's hard to start trusting people and answering questions like that. Sophia lowered her gaze again and asked to be given at least a few minutes to answer normally. Of course, she has no bad intentions, and there's no point in deceiving him, but in this situation, her silence might seem too suspicious. But unfortunately, due to stress and her past hard life, she can't do it any other way, so she needs to think carefully before she promises anything. Finally, the moment had come when she'd made up her mind and figured out what to say to that. As a friend, the girl decided to reveal her only secret, which her uncle had ordered her not to tell anyone. She told about her past marriage. Sophia doesn't know yet whether she will regret it or not. But in any case, if she wants to gain his trust, she must confess it to him, in her opinion. It would be wrong to hide this information from the man with whom she plans to live the rest of her life with. He should know absolutely everything about her, even if it's not very pleasant. Plus, she's very curious to know why her uncle is so against anyone knowing this information, since there's nothing wrong with it. The girl never understood what was wrong with people not being right for each other and deciding to break up. She began to recall the times when her ex-husband initiated the divorce. He said it with a smile, as if he had been waiting and had wanted to do it for a long time. It's impossible to convey the feelings the girl felt at that moment. It was one of the worst days of her life. She's sorry she married a man she didn't know or even know what he was planning. He took away everything she had, and after the divorce, she had no choice but to turn to her uncle for help, which was the second biggest mistake of her life, after marrying her ex-husband. Surprisingly, the wolf reacted quite calmly. He didn't start getting nervous and accusing her of having a relationship before that. Sophia had expected a completely different reaction, but as soon as he said there was no problem, she was much relieved. Jade understood why she had been so nervous all this time and was afraid to admit it. He explained that he would never blame her for it. After all, everyone had their mistakes in a situation like that. He tried to reassure her and reminded her that not all people she tells the truth to will react the same way he did. In the moment, he seriously considered that it is really, after such a past, very difficult to stop depending on me around me and start living for my own pleasure, much less deny me something. Afterward, Jade assumed that the girl was here instead of her half-sister. It's obvious to him that it was most likely Angelina who did everything she could to keep herself safe, and get her sister to marry the beast instead of her. He felt sorry for the girl, imagining how much she'd had to endure and what it was like to have other people do everything in her place. In that case, he again decided to reassure her and confess that even her previous marriage would have no effect on his attitude towards her. Since she is already his bride, the wolf promised that from now on, her life will start to change for the better. He sincerely wants her to be happy and forget about her past. Sophia couldn't believe her ears. From the very first day she came here, she had been afraid to tell this secret. She was afraid of ruining not only the wolf, but her uncle as well. But now, she had no other choice and had to be as honest as possible. It's the only way she can gain his trust and have no doubt that she has nothing more to hide, now that she has no secrets. At some point, the girl couldn't help herself and cried. She was very pleased to hear such words, and to realize that it is possible not to be afraid of anything. If, on the day she was about to move out of her uncle's house, someone had told her that the wolf would turn out to be very kind, she would never have believed it. In fact, he was even better than the people she lived with. She had yet to meet anyone who treated her as well as Jade did. With each passing day, she stops being afraid of him and begins to enjoy her new life. The girl does not even doubt that he sincerely wants to help her. It turns out that next to him, her biggest dream came true. She became happy and stopped being afraid of others. Now she doesn't owe anyone anything, and the only thing she has to do is enjoy life and do only what makes her happy. Not long ago, she felt superfluous and tried to please evil relatives just for sleeping in their house. She didn't do anything other than cleaning. Sophia was single-handedly doing a job that usually takes the entire staff a few days to do. No attention was paid to her even when she complained of her ill health. Even wounds or loss of consciousness guaranteed her even a few hours of rest. It was a living hell that she'll never get over. No matter how hard she tries, it's no wonder that once she gets to the Lord and feels supported, she can't control her tears and wants to be thankful for it all the time. Even ordinary respect from others seems new to her. She's just used to earning even food, let alone respect. Meanwhile, the wolf took her hand and told her that he understood her perfectly. But anyway, she would have to get used to the new reality that all normal people lived in. Because good treatment of each other or food is no longer something to be earned, it's the norm, the air, or whatever. There's no luxury in that. As it turned out to her initially, she was just used to bad things and thought she wasn't worthy of something better. It seems like from this day forward, her life is really going to start to change, especially since she deserves it more than anyone else. When she met the wolf, she never dreamed that he would turn out to be a wonderful man to marry. At this point, she was even beginning to be grateful to her uncle, because if it wasn't for him, she wouldn't have met this guy. Meanwhile, in that house, as usual, it's never quiet. Angelina has started to receive a lot of marriage proposals, and each time, it makes her angrier and angrier. The girl doesn't want to get married and has asked many times not to have these letters brought to her. She still doesn't even open them. Over the years, she has constantly received such offers and constantly declined. The girl has not gone on a single date. She's just not interested, but at the same time her parents keep insisting that she meet someone and stop saying no. But Angelina knows exactly why they're doing this. Her parents are trying to capitalize on it as usual. They're looking for the most promising groom for her. At some point, the girl remembered her sister and wondered how she was doing and if she'd even survived. But she doesn't even realize that she's doing much better with the beast than she has all these years with them. Surprisingly, after a girl gives up on dating, she continues to dream of a relationship she can brag about later on. Hours later, the assistant came to her again and informed her that she had received another letter. The woman was afraid to even enter her room. Her hands began to tremble, and she was afraid to even look her mistress in the eyes. Angelina started yelling at her again and ordered her from now on to throw all those letters in the trash can so she wouldn't even see them. How suddenly, afterward, she became interested in reading one of them for the first time, and she took the letter from the assistant and began to read This letter was sent by a boring man she met at a recent banquet. He's very rich, but she didn't like his looks. At the same second, the girl threw the letter on the floor and said that she was not interested. She was once again convinced that there was no point in responding to these proposals. It's very strange that she wants to get married, but refuses to go out with hundreds of men who want to meet her. At some point, she noticed that she was too bored to have a sister around. She loved watching her and seeing a scared face in any situation, But since there was no such thing now, she had nothing else to do. Turns out all she did was watch her sister and boost her self-esteem. At this point, she went outside to have some fun, and not to think about bad things. The girl met a dog who was clearly not happy to see her. She was frightened of him and out of control. The girl never liked dogs, and it shows very well. The dog sensed what kind of person she was, so he reacted very aggressively. After that, she started screaming very loudly and called her mother for help. Angelina's not used to solving her problems on her own, because it was always her mother who did it for her. She said that she was very scared, and she didn't want this dog in the garden. The girl was worried about getting rid of it, or at least giving it to someone else. The woman laughed and said that it was not necessary, because it was possible to create a separate room for him where no one would enter. In her opinion, it was the most suitable option. But the girl is not satisfied with this option. She wants to get rid of this dog, because the dog is good only to his mistress. She doesn't want to put up with it. So she went to her father. She still has hope that he'll understand and help her get rid of the dog. But he immediately refused and said it was wrong. They hadn't promised the girl that he would be okay, so they couldn't fulfill Angelina's wish. But the girl decided not to give up. She insisted that she could think of a way to outsmart her sister, because most likely she would either not survive or stay there forever and forget about her dog. The man couldn't stand it and explained that his decision was not up for debate. He wasn't going to repeat the same thing 10 times over. He asked her to get out of that office and not to ask any more questions like that, because next time he wouldn't even listen to her. Angelina realized that she will not succeed, so began to come up with her own plan. She does not plan to stop and continues to take revenge on her sister. Her parents did not support her for the first time and denied her something. The girl has never been in such a situation and does not understand why this happens. Meanwhile, the next day has arrived. Unlike her sister, Sophia is happy and continues to enjoy her new life. She woke up early in the morning, looked in the mirror, and thanked everyone who had influenced her destiny. She had gotten to the place she had dreamed of. She did all the perfect husband stuff and completely forgot that very first day. She was afraid of him and wanted to go back. Sophia regretted that when she was asked to marry a beast, she didn't want to do it and was angry at her sister. Though if it wasn't for her, she would have never gotten here. Now she feels like the luckiest girl in the world. She's grateful to her fate that even after hell at her uncle's house, she met this guy. Sophia is trying to get used to her new life, and every day it gets easier and easier for her to get used to it. She is treated much better by the staff, everyone around her, and even her future husband. They saw her as someone they could trust, who doesn't have bad intentions or anything like they originally thought. So her life is slowly but slowly starting to change. Even the maid who was initially nice to her has become even nicer to her. A little more and they'll be best friends. Meanwhile, they met and began to discuss the recent events. The maid told how the girl had fainted and how the gentleman was greatly worried about her. He was genuinely concerned and wanted to help. In fact, even those who treated her badly wanted to help and felt guilty. They admitted for the first time that they were very grateful for her help. The girl admitted that in fact, she was eating very poorly, and all because of the lack of food intake, in which she was restricted by relatives with whom she lived before. Maid could never have thought that the girl had suffered so much before and been in such dreadful conditions. She has not even words to describe her surprise. For even here, as a maid, her life is much better than that of a girl in her uncle's house. She began to feel sorry for her and promised that she wouldn't tell anyone about it, because I'm sure the girl wouldn't want anyone else to know about it either. They started talking about it like real friends who don't hide anything from each other and can talk about anything. They really support each other and try to help each other. They don't see each other as a maid or a mistress. They make time for it on purpose and talk about their problems that before they had no one to share with. Even the Lord didn't mind you girls socializing. Once again, it proves that even a wolf can be kinder than some people, like her uncle. The girl doesn't even know a man who could be meaner, rougher, more cruel than he is. Sophia wishes she had never seen him again, and soon forget that he even exists. Hearing these words, the racing one reacts every time, as if it was the first time she heard it. She puts herself in her shoes, and doesn't realize how unbearable it was. At that moment, a guy comes into the room. He knocked on the door and immediately apologized for the sudden visit. Sophia said it was okay, and he didn't have to worry about it, because she was happy to see him anytime. Afterward, Jade said he wanted the girl to do something for him today. She was very curious as to what sudden plans he might have had for her. She looked at him and realized that she probably didn't even have the imagination to figure out what he wanted from her. At this point, the guy behind him starts to hurry up. You see, he's sick of waiting. He intervened in the conversation and didn't even apologize, though perhaps his status quite allows for such behavior, even in Jade's presence. Sophia listens to all this and tries to understand why the guy didn't come alone. Apparently, the request he was talking about could be directly related to this person. The guy who'd started hustling didn't stop. He went on to accuse Jade of being too shy. The guy immediately became indignant and said that wasn't true at all. The guy didn't expect that at this very moment, his acquaintance would purposely make him uncomfortable in front of the girl. He had already regretted more than once that he had allowed this person to go together. It would have been much better if he had just kept quiet, or at least not tried to humiliate in front of Sophia. It was as if he was doing it on purpose. And smiling too. Jade tried to calm down and pretended he wasn't hurt at all by the words. He changed the subject and said that he had wanted to introduce them for a long time. As much as he didn't want to do that, the first thing he did was introduce his friend whose name was Byron. The guy came closer and said he was very happy to meet him and apologized for his words. Instead of giving the others a chance to say something, he will purposely complicate things and bring up the wedding by asking uncomfortable questions and looking each of them in the eye in turn. Sophia does not even know how to react to this. She was not ready to respond to it, and especially in the presence of a stranger, because usually it happens in private with her future husband, in a comfortable and calm environment. Jade asks what he's doing this for, and hints that if this keeps up, someone is going to walk out of this room right now. Byron chuckled and asked them to relax. After all, he didn't think there was anything wrong with that. He read that if they were afraid to talk about it themselves, he would be happy to help them do so. Sophia has a lot of thoughts and answers for this man, but for some reason she's very afraid to say them out loud. She sees that Jade is not exactly thrilled with her friend's behavior either. It's at least a little comforting, and gives her hope that he'll finally kick him out of this room, because it's only out of respect for a stranger that she can't answer him as rudely as Jade might have done. Lastly, she made up her mind to speak. She said her opinion, namely, that she would only talk about it with the person concerned. The guy looked at her surprised, but at the same time he perfectly understands her position. Seeing her together, he would probably have answered the same way. The guy agrees with her completely, but the fact that she wasn't afraid to say it is both surprising, but at the same time, incredibly gratifying. After her words, the assistant decided to join the conversation to remind her that it was better not to speak in that tone, because they had such rules. Byron smiled, which meant that he as well as the assistant had not expected such a bold answer from her. But as it turned out, the girl was able to demand conditions under which she would be willing to talk about it. At this point, Sophia reminded her that everyone has the right to do or not do what they don't want to do, because for now, she doesn't owe anyone anything. Byron, because of the fact that it was the first time he had met such a person who was not afraid to say such a thing in the presence of beasts, smiled and began to look at the girl with even more interest. But at the same time, the guy realizes that he can't express his real opinion because there is a man who will protect her in any situation. Sophia hinted that if she was treated well, she would be treated the same way. I wonder if they'll be able to find some kind of compromise or at least not have a scandal. Because from the outside, everything looks calm enough, and if someone didn't allow themselves to say too much, everything would be much better. The girl is sure that the guy understands perfectly well that he said too much, but at the same time, it does not affect her attitude to this man, because she herself has been in his place more than once. After a few minutes, Byron says that he doesn't really want to be in a bad relationship himself, so offers a truce and apologizes for his behavior. This moment, Jade remembers that he's the one who's supposed to talk and be in his friend's shoes. But at some point, they switch places, and it's mostly Byron talking to Sophia. The guy corrects himself and joins the conversation. He suggested that if she was okay with it, they could address the topic soon in private. And then, he admitted his mistake and promised that the next time they needed to talk about something, he wouldn't bring outsiders with him. The girl is very happy that he realizes this and really wants to improve. It means he cares about her opinion and comfort. The guy looked at his friend and with just one look made it clear that they were in for a very serious conversation. Even the girl was very frightened, because she didn't think that the wolf would be so angry with her friend. She just said her opinion, and the man would seriously have to answer for his behavior. Although maybe he really deserves it, because you should have thought about what you can and can't say to a strange girl. Hopefully it won't affect their friendship. They'll just discuss the situation and continue to talk normally. From this moment begins the most interesting. The guy proposed to go outside and after a while announced a very important news. He ordered all his assistants to spread rumors that she is his fiancée. Of course, she had no right to refuse. But at this moment, everything was too unexpected. The girl knew that sooner or later it would happen, but did not think that right here and right now. At that moment, Sophia wished even more that her fiancé's friend would go away, because now he was definitely redundant. Surprisingly, he didn't even have to hint about it. He offered to wait for them outside. Jade asked that the bride not worry and promised that nothing bad awaited her, at least not today. She began to go into some room and scrutinize everything around her. She hadn't been here yet. For some reason, the guy invited her into his own medical room, probably because there are never any strangers here and you can be alone. It turns out that this is his workplace where he grows his medicinal flowers and creates the medicine. It is a very special place for him, and he is not allowed to leave without permission. It seems like she really has nothing to worry about. But like any other girl, after hearing about marriage and something like that, she just can't react calmly and normally to it. It's not every day she gets to be the wife of a beast and with no way to refuse. She's lucky the guy understands her anxiety and even tries to calm her down. All she has to do is listen to his every word and see if she's ready to spend the rest of her life with him. A moment, he held out his hand to her and asked that she would give in return her own. Jade saw her startled look and reiterated that if she didn't trust him that much, he was willing to wait and they would talk when she was ready for it. He has no intention of insisting and forcing her to do anything. It is much more important to him that she does not even think that he can do any harm. In the end, as a sign that she was okay with it and would try to trust him, the girl gave her hand and agreed to whatever he had planned. After that, the fellow asked her to look around and tell him how much she liked being here. For personally, for him, there was nothing more comfortable and cozy than this place. Sophia realizes that even if she was uncomfortable, saying that something is wrong is not the best thing to do. So she respected the opportunity to be here and said that it is really nice here. Jade remembered that the girl might not be used to the special and peculiar smell of the medication, so promised that if anything, they could go back out at any time. Sophia replied that it was fine, and in fact if he hadn't mentioned it, she wouldn't have even paid attention to it. And then the boy warned her that the ground here was very wet and slippery, and he took her hand more firmly and asked her to be careful, for he had fallen here more than once. After a few more minutes, she managed to relax and trust this man, and Sophia didn't even notice how she stopped expecting a catch and watching his every move. Meanwhile, he wanted to add something interesting, something the girl had probably never encountered or heard of before. Without thinking, he told her that he had often had to destroy people, at which point Sophia immediately remembered her sister telling her the same thing. It turns out that he's actually not as violent a beast as some of the people he's met. Sometimes he's scared to talk to them. Hearing that made Sophia tense up a little again. Unlike the others, Jade can be considered very kind, although for some reason, his opposite is considered the most evil and aggressive beast of all. The lady marvels at how he first tries to calm her down, and then does his best to make those efforts in vain. And at this point, he successfully starts to ruin his impression of himself. The guy talks about how much he liked seeing people's scared eyes, and especially to bring them to such a state that they start begging him for mercy, which he has never done and is not going to do. But of course, the girl is not concerned. According to him, she is an exception and the only person he will never touch. But if he suddenly starts to doubt or thinks she's planning to deceive him or had bad intentions in the first place, the notion of exclusion can disappear in a second. He has never tolerated lies, and especially not to himself, especially from people everyone has known for a long time. And in his whole life, he's never forgiven anyone or given a second chance. It just doesn't exist for him. In his opinion, if a person had done wrong once, there could be no goodbye, not even a temporary one. Sophia tries to pretend that she admires his greatness, but at the same time, she's starting to be a little afraid of him again. For if you think for a moment that there is no man or beast that can protect you from someone like him, but he'd warned her about that from the start. The girl wanted to stay and promised she wouldn't complain about anything. After that, Jade brought up his hobby again, and this time, he talked about what a fascinating activity it was. But unfortunately, he didn't know many people who would want to do it with him. Create something new, experiment, and help the world by making new and better medicines. At one point, he asked her to hand her some basket that she could reach closer to the... Which means it's the moment they came here for. He starts showing them the process of making his signature drug. Sophia was very excited, for she had always wanted to participate in this. And since he had offered it herself, to refuse, she had not even had a thought. She brought him some berries, some liquid, and many other things. And of course, every ingredient must be of good quality and as fresh as possible. This is the main rule in making medicines. The composition must consist of the best, and especially ingredients. Nothing else Jade uses in her work. He does it so well, so fast and so well that Sophia didn't even notice that he had already made something. Until this moment, the girl was sure that the process can take several days and even months. But as it turned out, thanks to special technology, the necessary drugs can be created in a matter of seconds. At this point, she begins to understand why her uncle wanted the business so badly. Because Jade has the best lab in the world. The guy saw that she was thinking about something and stopped listening to him. So he asked if she was really that uninterested in him. Sophia replied that he just misunderstood her, and really she was just trying to memorize and understand everything he was telling her. After a while, as it turned out, making medicine wasn't all he had planned for this unusual date. He showed her some red book, at the sight of which apparently his bride immediately understood what it was, because even a person who knows nothing about it will immediately realize that it is something special. He let her hold this book in her hands because he realizes that this is the dream of so many people. Sophia never thought she would ever touch this book, for if her uncle saw it now, he would probably be at least speechless or unconscious. Jade had of course been prepared for such a reaction, but he hadn't thought this book would surprise his fiancée so much. He could see how much she appreciated the opportunity he had just given her. After that, he asked if she had knowledge of a foreign language, because even if a person receives or buys this book, it doesn't mean that they can read it. Not even all translators know the language. When suddenly, Sophia replied that she would have no problem reading and understanding everything that was written here, if of course, he would allow it and let her do it, something he obviously hadn't expected. Once upon a time, the girl traveled very often with her parents as a child, and because of this, she has no problem understanding and being able to speak several languages. Also, she very often practiced and studied it in her spare time at home. Her parents watched it for an hour and said that someday she would thank them for it. It was the first time she'd managed to surprise him. Until that day, he was absolutely sure that no one else but him could read the contents of the book, and as it turned out, he was very much mistaken. All this time, there was a girl who could learn a foreign language perfectly and probably speak it better than Jade did. For a moment, she looked at him and realized that she might have offended him, because it was probably unpleasant for him to know that someone else was better at something than him. She felt very embarrassed, but at the same time, she didn't understand why she was feeling guilty at all, because it wasn't her fault that she was learning something and she was good at it. Because of the unpleasant emotions, she again remembered her uncle, because of whom also she constantly felt guilty and changed often. He was very often dissatisfied with the fact that the girl was developing and trying to learn something. He, on the contrary, wanted her to become worse, to be capable of nothing, and to depend only on him. He would purposely take her books from her, ruin them and throw them away, and then enjoy her tears. It is truly the most horrible and unpleasant memory from childhood. Unfortunately, there's no way she'll ever be able to erase them like an eraser after a pencil on paper. No matter how hard she tries, she'll have memories and images of him trying to ruin her life for the rest of her life. It's impossible to put into words how much she resents living without her parents for most of her life. At that moment, the guy looked at her and in that second saw how much she was worried about something. He thought again that it might be very difficult for her to forget some unpleasant moments from her past. He remembers very well how hard it is for her to fall asleep at night, remembering what used to be. But at the same time, he does not try to start talking about it or asking something because he realizes that when she wants it, this conversation will certainly become. As much as he wants to know all the details, he tries to remain patient and wait for the moment when she wants to tell him everything. Meanwhile, Sophia tried to focus on the date and listen intently to her fiancé, so that in no way did he think she wasn't interested in spending time with him. She promised that after some time, she would answer all his questions. But for now, she would like to remember less about the bad things that had happened. Because anyway, even if she tells him, it won't change anything. Whatever's in the past is in the past. The girl said the best thing he could do on his part was not to remind her of it, and to make sure she didn't have a second to think of her uncle. Because only if she's really happy will she not want to be sad and think about things that might be upsetting. Afterward, they went back to the book. But did he really talk so much about it that he was going to give it to the... As soon as she thought about it, Sophia warned that it was too much. She didn't think she deserved to accept such expensive or rather incredibly valuable gifts. She tried to give the book back and said if he didn't take it back, she'd feel guilty. Jade replied that there was nothing wrong with it, as it was just a gift he genuinely wanted to give her, because he saw how much she appreciated it. If he had given the book to some other person, it would not have made any sense, because not everyone can understand and appreciate such an act on his part. Since he's already fully learned the contents, there's no point in him keeping this book in his lab. It will be much more useful to his fiancée. Afterward, to get the girl to stop returning the gift, he purposely talked about how surprised he was by her perfect command of a foreign language. As it turned out, it was just an excuse to compliment her and tell her how much he admired her. The last time Sophia heard such words was many years ago, in the distant past, when her parents were still alive. She can't remember a day that her father or mother didn't give her a compliment or praise her for something. No matter what she did, they praised her and told her what a wonderful child she was. To keep the girl from getting sad again, Jade promised that he could give her some other book of her own choosing. It means only one thing. Since he is trying to please her in every possible way, the guy obviously has some feelings, but so far, he shows them only in this form, without words and some more obvious actions. And then, so that Sophia wouldn't think that he was trying to please her, the guy changed the subject and asked for help with something, namely to translate a small text that even professional translators couldn't cope with. Of course she agreed to help him at once, for it was not only interesting but a great honor, and besides, he did not ask her for anything so often that she had a right to refuse it. Even though he knew the girl couldn't refuse, he was pleased that she had decided to help him without any thought anyway. After that, they said their goodbyes and went to their rooms. It was evening, and instead of going to rest, Sophia opened the book and began to study the contents. She decided she wouldn't turn on a bright light so as not to wake anyone up. She found a small lamp that would be just enough to make out the words. The girl had asked her assistant to bring a small table, and had planned ahead that it wouldn't take more than a few hours. At least that's what she planned to do. From the moment the guy put this book in her hands, she didn't let it go for a second. The girl sees it as something special, but that was not all. As soon as she started reading the contents, Sophia remembered her parents more than a dozen times, and mentally thanked them for following her education so carefully and controlling her language learning. Although initially it was very difficult and seemed something impossible. But now that she understands every word perfectly, this feeling simply cannot be conveyed in words. Because at the very least, the skill helped surprise Jade. He had a better attitude, and overall, it was a truly magical day, especially the end of it. It's very hard for her to concentrate now, because as soon as she starts reading the words, she thinks of her parents. And after that, of all the terrible things that happened after their deaths. And of course, the guy who could change her life for the better. He literally saved her and gave her a new life. Meanwhile, as it turns out, it's not just his fiancée who is awake in the palace. The beast himself doesn't even plan to go to his room until he's sorted out all his affairs. A friend who is a helper came to him and brought him documents. which at the same second spoiled his mood, which is very dangerous, because at any moment, he can turn into an aggressive beast. He clutched the document, and at that moment, his assistant regretted that he had even come at such a late hour. When the guy was rarely in a good mood, it was easy to make him angry now. Though on the other hand, if he didn't do it now, the gentleman would see those documents the next day, and getting upset first thing in the morning is worse than before bedtime. The deputy had no choice but to do his job, which he had to do no matter what, and of course it didn't take a few minutes for the guy to turn into an animal. His eyes turned red very quickly, and he had the urge to destroy someone. It was the only way he was used to dealing with these situations. The wolf ceased to control his behavior, emotions, and attitude towards the helper. He became simply uncontrollable. As much as Brian wanted to turn around and run away, he had to be here and could only leave after permission was granted. Lastly, the wolf asked him to solve the problem, because if he tried to do something himself, someone might get hurt. The guy promised he'd try to do something, but he doesn't promise he'll be able to do it anytime soon, because there's so much to do that you can't do it in a few days. You need at least a week or two. I guess he hasn't realized yet that the more bad news or words he says, the angrier his master gets. Meanwhile, as usual, it's never quiet at Uncle Sophia's house. They're always fighting with each other. They realized that the girl was in no hurry to do what they were trying to make her do, and as each day went by, stopped remembering each of them, though it wasn't as easy as she imagined it would be. The man sends her letters every day, but no reply has come back. The woman tries to support her husband, but when she starts talking to him about it, it gets worse. Even the daughter, who is constantly silent and uninvolved in her father's problems, begins that they will get any benefit at all. It's so bad that the man can't hear anyone. They try to support him and he just doesn't say anything. His behavior and ignoring even his close people once again proves the fact that he thinks only about himself. He did not even have a thought to calm his wife and daughter and say that he will try to solve something. Is a man fixated only on medication that can make him the richest man in the world? But it seems he can only dream of it. Meanwhile, the next day came, and Sophia's assistant came to Sophia first thing in the morning and started giving her lots of compliments. The girl today has a very pretty purple dress that matches her eye and hair color perfectly. The lady didn't expect such a reaction, though in fact, she really looks amazing. The assistant said that once the groom sees her, he won't be able to take his eyes off her. Sophia answered that she chose this dress on purpose because she felt that today was a special day that would change her life forever. She'd been thinking all night that something was going to happen, but unfortunately, she hadn't been able to figure out what to prepare for. So she just sits in her room and waits for something she doesn't know what it is. She's scared, but at the same time insanely curious. Because it could be a meeting with someone you know, news, or something else that can be both upsetting and joyful. At one point, the assistant looked at her hands and noticed that something was clearly missing. She suggested adding a little accent to the hands. In her opinion, you should wear white lace gloves with that dress, so she suggested changing from black to white. Sophia tried on one glove and looked in the mirror to compare which one her hand looked more appropriate with for this dress. And at that moment, she made the final decision that white is definitely the best color. So that's the choice. Afterward, they together simultaneously recalled the hairstyle, which as yet had not been done. The girl asked that if it was okay for the assistant to do some light hairstyles that wouldn't take too long to do. Since they don't have a lot of time, have to rush to be ready for any situation at a moment's notice. The assistant gladly agreed to help and said that mistress has incredibly smooth and shiny hair. It's a real pleasure to do her hair on it. At this point, Sophia looked at her and asked why she was giving so many compliments. The assistant was surprised and explained that it was hard to hold back such words when it was true. After a while, the girl realized that there was nothing wrong with it. She just wasn't used to it when someone started praising her, especially for a beauty she hadn't put any effort into. She is used to people noticing her efforts and saying something nice only when she works hard and tries to do something for a long time. Meanwhile, the assistant had managed to get her cleaned up. They even had some time to talk and think about what was going to happen today. After that, it was like she felt. Jade asked her to go down to the street and told her not to look out the windows so Sophia wouldn't see anything before time. He's already waiting for her outside and it seems he's not going to tell her anything. It's all going to be a surprise. Well, or she'll just find out everything along the way. As soon as he saw his bride, he looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. The girl is really just irresistible. Everything about her is perfect. Just the color of the dress is enough to make you fall in love with it at first sight. It wouldn't even be surprising if his first words were to ask you to marry him. As he could not find the strength to approach her first, she did. The girl came up and greeted the lad and at the same time, dazzled him with her beauty. At this point, he doesn't look as confident as he did on the first day he met you. It means only one thing. The girl's slowly starting to fall in love with this guy and she's doing a pretty good job of it. Not only was he kinder to her, but he started paying attention to things like her hair or the way she looked. Of course, he tries to hide his surprise, but he can't, because Sophia can see it all and realizes how awkward he's been since she showed up. But so as not to make him even more embarrassed, she looked away and made him look at her again. At this point, Jade couldn't help himself. He admitted that she looked just gorgeous and asked for it to be like this every day. It's very strange that at first he's very embarrassed and tries not to even look in her direction. And then a few minutes later, he's not afraid to say such compliments. After that, the guy hinted that today would be an interesting day and asked that Sophia trust him and not even think about worrying about anything. She should be calm and enjoy every moment of the day. Is the only thing required of her that day, unless of course she wants to go on a little date, like yesterday, but a little better and more interesting. Of course Sophia agreed. She didn't mind spending the day alone with him. Apparently the feeling she'd gotten last night wasn't deceptive. Just minutes after the date started, her relatives found out about it immediately. They found out all the details and even that the beast and the girl have a great relationship. She feels like a real princess. And every day, better than the previous one. Most of all, her sister started to envy her. She regretted refusing to marry this man, saw a happy Sophia and her dream life. It is very interesting to see their reaction, because these people not only could not get what they wanted, but now they are truly jealous of Sophia, because they have created a wonderful life for her and introduced her to a good and loving husband. The father has long since calmed down, but his daughter is clearly outraged by what she's just learned. She can't believe that the sister she wanted to ruin her life is now living a life she couldn't even dream of living. She asked her father how they could even let this happen, since the plan was the other way around, to capitalize and send her to a worse life. Though in turn, the man isn't even as upset as the girl. Unlike her, he's lost a lot more, and she acts like she's the one who's hurt the most. He tried to calm her down, but at the same time he suspected that she was just jealous of Sophia, which was why she was reacting so violently. To cheer herself up at least a little, she asked if she would have the same engagement as her sister, for if she didn't, she wouldn't survive it. The father replied that he didn't want to disappoint her, but unfortunately he doesn't have the possibility to organize something like Sophia had. It takes a lot of money, and they don't have enough budget even for food for the guests. The girl was upset, because she always thought her life couldn't be worse than Sophia's, and now that it was an indication that she had nothing to brag about. The man realizes how upset she is, but as much as he wants to, he can't give her anything that will even remotely resemble Sophia's life. Angelina just can't believe that she has begun to envy the man she thought was most unhappy a few days ago. The mere thought that Sophia may soon become a very respectable, happy, and wealthy person sets off a panic and envy that simply cannot be conveyed in words. Now she's ashamed of how she treated her before. Because if she needs help, her sister won't want to do it, and will remind her of how they treated her before, and how she felt around them. In the meantime, the very moment of the wedding ceremony had arrived, and of course, all her relatives were invited to the event. As much as they wanted to see a happy Sophia, they had to agree, and showed up before everyone else. Angelina turned around and saw her sister, and an incredibly handsome dream guy from whom it was impossible to take her eyes off. Just the kind of husband she had dreamed of all her life. Surprisingly, if she hadn't wanted to ruin Sophia's life, this guy could have been her husband. But as it was, she turned it down and probably regretted it a lot. The girl began to imagine herself in her place and very much wanted to turn back time, because she realizes that if she had not made a mistake, everything could have been very different. Surprisingly, the girl's father is not upset at all, and as soon as he starts asking why Angelina is not in the mood, she doesn't even know how to hold back to calmly answer this question. She just doesn't have the words to describe how much she hates everyone around her right now, and especially herself, because she is the only one to blame for her problem. She shouldn't have refused and given this opportunity to a person she hates. The man realized that it was pointless to talk to her, and during the whole event, she would most likely not even smile once or be happy for the newlywed. Very strange. But just a few days ago, he was the same as his daughter, and now, even a little happy today. Angelina doesn't even hide the fact that she doesn't even enjoy being in this place. She's just disgusted to see her happy sister, especially next to the guy she herself lost. She did not explain anything and started to leave in an unknown direction. The man tried to stop her, but he failed, although in fact, he does not want to understand her problems. He has enough of them himself. The girl doesn't realize that there's really no point in regretting something that can't be fixed or returned, especially if it's her own fault for giving up the chance to be Jade's wife. At that moment, when the girl began to return to her father's office, she realized, quite by accident, that all this time she had been communicating not with her father, but with her assistant. And the whole time her father was in his office, it's impossible to believe she's really so nervous. She didn't even notice who she was talking to. At this point, the girl enters the office and sees the same disgruntled parents as herself. Now everything is falling into place because it was strange that the father was less indignant than his daughter. Angelina approaches her parents and tells them that they need to have a very serious talk. She has no intention of accepting the fact that her life will be worse than Sophia's. She came in with some kind of proposal, and it's no wonder if it's another plan to hurt her sister. Meanwhile, at the event itself, the newlyweds are already receiving congratulations from their guests. They are very happy to see all those who sincerely wish them happiness. And of course, most of them, the real beasts. They are among the staff, guests, and others in attendance. At that moment, Jade was visited by the same guy Angelina had inadvertently mistaken for her father. He came to say something very important because a few minutes ago, he happened to notice someone suspicious outside. But that's not all. It turns out that as soon as he looked in their direction, these people immediately started to leave, as if they were scared and didn't want anyone to see them. The guy asked for more security, because today, nothing and no one should interfere with this beautiful event. It is one of the most important tasks of each of the staff. Meanwhile, Sophia heard a familiar voice, turned around and saw her uncle, although they had not seen each other for a long time, but she still seemed to freeze at the sight of him and was afraid to say anything. Now the girl is completely independent of this man, and also, he is almost a stranger to her. Accordingly, if he tries to harm her or order something, she can with a clear conscience tell her husband about it. As soon as he started talking, the girl realized that if he approached her, he definitely had some kind of plan, because usually, he didn't even care about her existence at all. He only brought her up when it could benefit him. At this point, it was as if the guy sensed his fiancée was in danger and approached as soon as she started to get nervous. Jade asked her to stand behind him so the girl could calm down a bit and stop being nervous. He decided to talk to her uncle himself. They started talking about neutral topics that had nothing to do with the reason why this man was here. The man said that a marriage between a beast and a man was very rare, and he was very glad that they were one of the first in whose family it had happened. But now, and the guy realizes there's no sincerity in those words, he just said it to distract them and keep things normal. After that, the man walked away and left them alone. The guy reflected that just now, he had noticed some very unpleasant energy when dealing with his fiancée's uncle. It was strange to him that the girl had even lasted and lived with him for most of her life. He realized that from that moment on, he was the only person who could take care of her, and more importantly, protect her and make her happy. And after that, he suddenly felt like talking to the man. Jade promised he'd be fine. He just wanted to clarify something and tell the man who had made her so nervous. The guy came up to the man, and the first thing he did wasn't the one to start talking. The uncle had come by to ask where Jade's mom was. He'd looked all over the room for her but hadn't seen her. The guy said she was seriously ill and in another city, so she couldn't be at the wedding. And he also told about his father who died a long time ago. And because of that, his mom worried so much that she got sick and hasn't been able to heal for several years now. At first, the man looked at him with a thoughtful look, and then after all, decided what to answer to it. Not surprisingly, if in this he would find some benefit, because otherwise he simply does not have it any other way. But at some point, he changed his mind to say if he smiled a little, it means only one thing. He had another plan to get rich and get what he wanted. At this point, he listened carefully to the guy and realized that since he was the one in charge of business security and there were no parents around, it would be much easier to take it all away and appropriate it for himself. He thought he'd have to face a lot of problems, but as it turns out, he'd just have to trick this guy. Just have to divert his attention and quietly do his thing. At this point, the guy didn't stay quiet and immediately realized that this man was up to something. Thanks to his wife, he knows who he's dealing with and seems to know what to say to him. Jade stepped closer and made it clear that if anyone even thought about trying to trick him, it wouldn't lead to anything good. So he advised against it. The uncle looked at him and was even a little frightened. He didn't think that the guy would turn out to be much more serious than he seemed at first glance. He wouldn't be as easy to deceive. The thing is, since the guy's been in charge of his own business for a long time, he realizes how many people there are in the world who want to take everything for themselves. He carefully watches every day that no one suspicious does not approach his palace even a few meters. He hired the best security, which works without weekends. In all, this involves more than 100 people. Accordingly, once he learns that there is a particular man who has been planning to do this for years, things become much easier. Now he will control that man non-stop. It was out of the question for him to approach his house freely, much less come unannounced. As much as Uncle is trying to sound nice right now and smile like he's really excited for this wedding, he's still not trying to hide his awful energy and sinister intentions. And at that moment, the most interesting thing starts. He came even closer to him and decided that this conversation should be productive. There was no point in hiding his opinion and pretending that it was a sincere and friendly meeting anymore. Jade was blunt about the fact that if he found out that any of his relatives or acquaintances tried to hurt the business, or worse, take it over, those people would face him, a beast who never forgives such a thing. Of course, the uncle immediately realized who we're talking about, and after this, he doesn't even have words to answer. He just has to calmly disperse and not say anything unnecessary. He's very unhappy about being one of the suspects, because before he was sure that no one knew his plan. In that case, he has only 3 options: back off and stop doing something, keep going and ignore the warning, and the third, come up with a new plan. But at this point, he highly doubts later that even if he succeeds, this guy will leave him alone and let him live a quiet life enjoying his wealth. Meanwhile, Sophia walks down the hall and tries to calm down, but she can't, because in the presence of her relatives, it's impossible. At the same time, she is very much afraid that her uncle is so anxious to get the business that he may succeed in doing so. In that case, all she can do is help her husband and do everything she can to make sure the business stays under control and can never be accessed by anyone. At some point, she heard a sound, and it turned out her aunt and sister had been there the whole time. They tried to smile to speed up their real emotions, which are very different from what their faces look like, especially Angelina. She smiles like she's going to see a friend, or someone she's been waiting for a long time. But it's obvious there's something sinister, and nothing more behind that smile. Sophia didn't expect to see them at this moment, for she was sure that no one was around. She was glad that she hadn't said anything out loud, and no one had heard anything. She greeted and said she was very glad to see her, but in reply, neither her aunt nor Angelina said a word. Sophia was upset, and only then did the woman say that they could have done without the greetings, since she wasn't the kind of person they wanted to exchange pleasantries with. As expected, a situation where there is no stranger around. They talk to her the way they used to. These people haven't changed at all. At some point, the girl realized that she heard something about her dog in those words. The woman very quietly saying that they were going to get rid of her, even though she promised to take care and feed her. Victoria said that now if the girl will take care of her dog, she has to take it back. They don't want it in their home anymore, much less take care of it. Sophia doesn't understand how she's going to do this, because she thought it would be different, and she wouldn't have to think about it. At this point, the best part was when the two confessed why they were here, and it turns out Angelina had a plan to get back what she'd lost. Namely, she wants to switch places with her sister and take her husband as well. Surprisingly, she's not bothered by the fact that the wedding ceremony just took place a few minutes ago. Sophia is very confused and doesn't even know what to say to this. She is upset and asks how they can even offer her such a thing. After all, they forced her to become the wife of a beast and kicked her out of the house. The woman saw how frightened the girl was, and immediately realized that convincing her of something or forcing her to do something would be easy. Victoria warned that as soon as the event was over, she would be sure to talk to Jade's relatives and resolve the matter. Although if the girl had refused and said that no one could take her husband away from her, things would have been very different, and this woman would not have been so sure of her words. Very interesting how it will end, because in fact, everything depends only on the guy. If he wants to protect his wife and against this idea, then everything will be fine. The main thing is that he did not agree to the proposal of these people. If, of course, loves Sophia. I don't even want to imagine what could happen if the guy leaves her and makes her go back to her aunt and uncle's house. And even worse, if Angelina gets her way and thinks she's better at everything again, it will be constant ridicule and abuse from their side. She doesn't even know he could be worse, because it's better to be left on the street with nothing than to go back to that house. Sophia seriously thought about how good she had it here. So going back was the worst thing that could happen. The only thing left to hope for was Jade. Just then, that the girl couldn't answer anything and said she wouldn't give up her seat for anything. These two immediately started smiling and thinking it would be easier than they thought it would be. In such a situation, it is very difficult to control her emotions, and even more so, to respond correctly to all these words that hurt more than anything. It is very hurtful to realize that her life depends on other people, and has never depended only on her. Just as suddenly as she couldn't help herself, gave up and started crying, her husband came in. He touched her shoulder and said it was too soon to cry. He said it was a huge mistake of his to leave her alone, especially when she could be approached at any moment by any of her relatives. It was only with his arrival that she was finally able to relax, because now she could get his opinion and know what he thought about it at once. Unless, of course, this woman was afraid to talk to him herself without her husband. The first thing he did was greet the relatives and ask how they were doing. The woman didn't even have time to say a single word before Angelina started talking about herself. She tried to speak in as pleasant a voice as possible to create a good impression, but she still failed. Jade knows exactly what kind of person she is and what she needs. The girl saw him so close for the first time and at first sight realized something really her ideal. She doesn't understand how she could ever give up on him in the first place. In the end, the guy wouldn't even listen to her because he was only interested in one thing, what they were talking about and why his wife was upset about something. How suddenly, Angelina wasn't afraid and said that she just wanted to apologize for her sister, who supposedly had been deceiving him all this time. Sophia thought she just heard it. But it seems that the girl wants to be his wife so much that she is not afraid to risk so much and say such words. Angelina said that, in fact, she was the one who was supposed to be his wife, but at some point was afraid of him and asked her sister to do it, who simply had no choice to give up. In order that he would definitely believe and want to help, she began to cry and said it was very hurtful to see her sister in the place that belonged to her. And that's not all. The girl said something that was forbidden. She discussed it even behind her mother, who begged her not to tell about it. Namely, that the girl was already married. Hearing this, the woman just couldn't believe her husband's, because just now, her daughter had just disobeyed her and said something that didn't need to be said. Afterward, the girl continued to insist that she was the only one who deserved to be his wife. I wonder how he'll react to that, because his wife has already told him what it was really like. But as it turned out, that's not all, Angelina said. Allegedly, her sister agreed to give up the role of his fiancée and return home, although in fact, it is not so. Sophia immediately said that she said no such thing, and these people were trying to trick him. At that very second, a woman came up to her and ordered her out of that room. And to make sure she obeyed her, the woman insinuated that if she didn't, her dog would be very badly hurt. After that, Angelina approached Lot again and asked him to think about who he wanted to live the rest of his life with. The man who had been cheating on him all this time, or her, who loved him very much. She promised that if he married her, She would show him that she was the perfect wife one could only dream of having. The situation is getting too tense. They don't even realize that at any moment, he could get so angry that he could turn into a sphere and destroy them in an instant if he loves Sophia. But for now, he's listened to each of them carefully and is thinking about making the right decision on which someone's life may depend. The main thing for him is that only those who deserve it, who cheat or try to appear better than they really are, should be punished. If suddenly Jade believes them and thinks his wife was really cheating on him, it's all gone. Her life will be ruined forever. Angelina has already said everything she wanted to say. It remains to be seen what he thinks, but so far the guy is calm, which makes it very hard to know what he thinks. When suddenly, he looked into Angelina's eyes and warned that if she didn't stop behaving like this, he would order his aides to kick her out of this house. The girl realized that she had overdone it a little and should not have been so active. After that, the Lord asked a question, after which everything became clear at once. Jade asked, could they really think he would believe those words? He wished they could have seen themselves from the outside, because immediately you would have seen how obviously they were trying to deceive him. He hinted that in any case he had already chosen his wife, and all the things they had just said about her were of no consequence to him. He would love her with any faults, if she had any at all. And even at that, the girl decided not to give up. She asked if he knew the reason why Sophia's ex-husband divorced her. At this point, just look at the faces of Sophia and her aunt. One or the other couldn't even think that the girl would bring it up. Angelina smiled and realized that her sister hadn't said anything about it. By the guy's reaction, it was immediately clear that he didn't know anything about it. The girl got even more excited and without any hesitation, told her that her sister's ex-husband had divorced her only because Sophia couldn't have children. And this is much more serious. It is impossible to believe that a girl wants to marry him so badly that she is ready to get rid of those who prevent her from doing it. And it will last for the next 5 years. In her opinion, the guy will stay with her only if he loves her. Truly did not plan to be with her, no matter what, even if he can't have a baby. Angelina is such a horrible person that she starts comparing herself to her sister, said about how supposedly he has to leave her just because they won't have children. But with her, they will have beautiful children. A few years ago, all Sophia heard about was that she was different, and the fact that she had some health problems scared a lot of guys away. She thought that she would never meet a man who would love her even with such flaws. Unfortunately, the last husband didn't like it. But if he had just offered to break up, it would have been much better than the way he self-esteemed her and compared her to other girls who are supposedly better than her in this respect. Instead of just quietly separating, he kept reminding me of it. And in addition to abusing me, the same thing was happening with his words. Sophia just wanted to get out of here and not see anyone else. If her husband suggested breaking up for that reason, she would be completely and forever disappointed in people. Angelina told not only that, to finally embarrass her sister, she recalled that her ex-husband left her for another girl. They had a child, and only after that, he admitted to cheating. And then, they broke up. She said it so Jade would understand. His wife is willing to put up with anything, and never puts you first and generally acts like a child. In her opinion, a girl that no one wants to take advantage of, knowing that even if she finds out, she'll still tolerate it. Actually, as it was in the previous relationship, the husband was not even afraid to tell anything. He looked at her and realized that for the sake of love, she is ready to tolerate everything that will be necessary. And it's only because she's afraid of being alone. He was the only guy who would go along with it, so he even let himself cheat. If a few minutes ago the guy was not embarrassed by anything, but now it is very interesting to see how he will react. In fact, he may be embarrassed not even by what he has just heard, but by what this girl allows herself to do. With every word she says, he's out of control. The guy gets really angry and can't even hold back. He's disgusted to hear her voice. At some point, he ordered her to stop and shut up, so he wouldn't hear or look in her direction anymore. The girl clearly didn't expect such a response, and realized that nothing was an obstacle for him. She probably just judged other people by herself, but the Lord turned out to be a slightly different person who respects her choices and isn't going to break off the engagement just for that reason alone. At that moment, Sophia felt so good that it was impossible to put it into words. She felt again, and once again, convinced that she had the best husband, who would be with her no matter what. Angelina regretted very much that she had even started talking about it in the first place. She was reminded that in any case, the other person's health was none of her business, especially since she has no right to think she's better just because she can have a baby. The guy said that if she keeps talking about it and disrespects his future wife, she will regret it very much. And if he says such words, in that case, she really better not resist. And better, silently go home and never come back here again. Even the woman who was just standing by was very much frightened at the sight of him. She didn't think he was such a faithful and loving husband. She was frightened at the same time, but at the same time she began to envy and admire this man, for she would have wanted such a husband for herself. At this point, in order to at least somewhat remedy the situation, she turned to the Lord and apologized for her daughter's behavior. She was truly sorry that because of this, the relationship between them was forever damaged. As soon as the girl started talking and said he just misunderstood her, the woman looked at her and started yelling really hard. She made it clear that right now, she better not talk to him. And it's true, because they don't even realize how much they risk pissing this man off. And if they do, there's very little chance they'll even be alive to go home. The girl was offended at her mother because she almost never yelled at her so much and shamed her in the presence of other people. Someone must have forgotten that just now she behaved the same way and shamed Sophia. Angelina did not hold back and began to cry. She became very offended because she only wanted to marry this handsome man, and he turned out to be not like the rest of her family. One has some values and never makes a choice solely in favor of profit, as they all do. Sophia listened to her husband and again remembered the time when she felt the support of her parents, because just now he had done exactly the same thing as her father had done. Her parents always protected her and never let anyone hurt her. A very valuable act for her, which the girl will remember for the rest of her life. A few years ago, when she was forced to live with her relatives, it was from that moment that she forgot what peace of mind and support from loved ones was like. As much as she'd like to go back in time, she's had to live with people who don't even notice her, let alone the fact that they've never once wished her a happy birthday. So here in this beautiful house and meeting the Lord, she'd never want to lose it all. When she saw him even, without hesitation, defend her and tell her he would love her under any circumstances, it was the best thing she had heard in years. Now the tears are not on her face, but on the people who used to drive her to this state every day, without exception. She believes they deserve to feel in her shoes and feel what it's like, and finally, that moment has arrived. In the end, the Lord said goodbye to his wife's relatives and promised that he would not tell anyone about this conversation. But only on one condition: they would never appear in his house again. The girls have no other choice, because if someone finds out about the situation, it could reflect badly on their family's reputation. At some point, the girl accidentally slipped, and it so happened that she couldn't stand on her feet. For some reason, the floor was too slippery. Because of her uncomfortable shoes and long dress, Sophia started to fall and apologized if she fell right on top of him. But she still managed to resist. And right after that, she started apologizing for the situation, or rather, for hiding her health problems from him. The Lord turned around and whispered quietly that she didn't have to apologize to him. He promised that he would help, and after a while, she wouldn't have any problems. And soon, they would definitely have a child together. He'll come up with a cure that will take care of the problem in seconds. Sophia never ceases to be amazed at what a wonderful husband she has. And with every word he says, she becomes more and more certain that they will be fine, and that there is no situation in which he would have acted the way her previous husband did. Without exaggeration, he's the perfect guy, and you can't imagine anyone better. In response, Jade that it was his responsibility. He was used to being responsible for his choices, and promised that it would always be that way. The girl can be fully confident that he will never betray or cheat on her as he has in the past. She's speechless. The girl couldn't even dream that her life had prepared such an incredible gift for her, because now she has everything. A fancy house, people around her who don't want to hurt her, a perfect husband without a single flaw, and the beautiful future he just promised. She doesn't even know what else to dream about. When suddenly, At such a perfect moment, an assistant came into the room. He apologized and said that he had to rush off somewhere. He realized he came at a bit of a bad time, but unfortunately they really don't have much time. Besides, it's his job. Genuinely sorry for what happened, so he promised it would never happen again. The guy just wasn't used to his master having a wife to keep him busy with. And after that, he reminded that it's time to go out to the guests. They are waiting for the dance that the newlyweds promised to dance together. So they have no other choice and have to go back to the hall. They agreed that right after the dance, they will be alone and talk about what they have not had time to talk about. Meanwhile, they are ready to dance their promised dance, a very long tradition in which newlyweds are obliged to do so on their engagement day. To support the newlyweds, other people also surrounded them and started to dance a slow dance to very pleasant and soothing music. At that moment, words are superfluous. They started looking at each other, and it was as if they fell in love at first sight. This day was really special and had a big impact on the way they treated each other. I really wonder if her relatives are looking at this, or if they've been walking for a while, afraid they'll just get kicked out of here. Anyway, there's really nothing else to do. They're the only ones no one is happy about. After they left here, even the atmosphere is noticeably much nicer. Some guests cannot enjoy this moment and admire the beautiful couple, because both the girl and the guy deserve to be treated well. And finally, they got it. As it turned out, her relatives hadn't left. They'd been spotted by some women. Only, did they really have a plan again? Otherwise, there was no point in them staying here. No wonder none of them are in a mood, especially Angelina, who's having the worst day of her life. She'd forgotten when she had felt as awful as she did now. It was just unbearable for her to look at her happy sister and the dream guy who was now her husband. It is simply impossible to talk to her, and even to be near her. The girl begins to resent everyone who gets in her way. She hates everything today, the people around her, and even herself. For she is most to blame for refusing to be in the place of the Lord's bride right now. Anyway, it's her own fault, except she didn't have to ruin the mood for everyone around her like this guy. Meanwhile, Jade asked if Sophia would mind if he stepped aside for a moment to greet his acquaintances. The girl said she would wait for him here not too far away, and of course it was no problem at all. As soon as he had moved a few meters away, the girl for some reason decided to turn around, and at that moment, something strange happened. She left some foreign language spoken by some man. She began to look around to see where he was. It turns out that one of the guests was very frightened at the sight of the assistant beast. The guy didn't notice how he started speaking another language. He thought he was being harmed. He didn't see the shape of the beast at all, from which it should have been immediately obvious that he was just going to be offered a drink like the rest of the guests. He started screaming very loudly, but the assistant explained everything right away. She said it was okay, and she didn't mean to hurt him at all. Sophia did not stand by, for she remembered how frightened she herself had been when she was in a similar situation. She came and stood between them. She suggested that everyone calmly say what they want to say, and only then can we sort things out properly.